In this video, I'm going to talk you through the first part of the practice paper. I will make a second video for the second part of the practice paper. Make sure you have your calculator with you. Alright, first one just says to use your calculator to find the two decimal places. Now make sure that your calculator is in degree mode. There should be a little D somewhere at the top of your screen on your calculator. For tan 71, we simply press the button tan 71 on the calculator. You can see I'm doing this on my calculator on the side. Equals 2.90. Notice that I rounded that number off to 2 decimal places. Pause the video and do sign 26 by yourself. For C, sine to the power of minus 1, 0.86. Well, that little sign to the minus 1 we find above the sign button on our calculator, so we have to press the shift button first. So I'm going to press shift, sign to the minus 1, and then put 0.86 in brackets, equals 59.32. Notice when I rounded off there, I needed to round up because the number after the second decimal was 5 or above. You should pause and do D yourself. Now for question number 2, we need to remember how to use SOHCAHTOA. So in class, we wrote it like this, and we have to remember how to label all our sides. Now it doesn't matter which angle we're using, this side is always the hypotenuse, the longest side. In this question, our angle is here, so this side here will be the adjacent because it's right next to that angle, which sees this side as our opposite. So in this particular question, we want to know the opposite, and we already know the adjacent, which tells us that we're going to use tan to solve this question. So you should circle tan. We'll need that concept of labelling sides and deciding whether it's sine, cos or tan in the next few questions. So make sure you're really comfortable with this skill. For question 3, we're asked to find x, so that's the length of this side here, correct to 1 decimal place. So again, here's our hypotenuse. It's the longest side in the triangle. From the angle that we are interested in or that we know about, this side here is the adjacent. It's right next to that angle. So in this question, we want to know the adjacent and we do know the hypotenuse. So when we look at our SOHCAHTOA, it's going to be a cos question because we've got A and H. Now we have to remember that cos 48 degrees. Now remember that this says up here, it's got to be the adjacent over the hypotenuse. So we've got to make sure we put the adjacent, which is x, over the hypotenuse, which is 14. Our next step in this question is to write 14 cos 48 degrees equals x, and then do that calculation on our calculator. So I'm going to my calculator and I'm doing 14 cos 48. Why don't you pause the video and do that yourself and make sure you get the same answer as me. I'm getting x equals 9.4 meters. So I'm remembering to put my units in and I'm remembering to round off to 1 decimal place because that's what it asked me for in the question. For part B, we're being asked to find an angle this time, but we still start with the same idea of labelling our sides. So this is the angle we'd like to find. This side next to it is the adjacent. This side over here is the opposite. It's true that this side here is the hypotenuse, but we don't need that in this question because these are the two sides that we've been given the lengths of. So A and O suggests that this is going to be a tan question, the T for tan. So I'm going to write tan of theta, I'm finding this angle, is equal to, it's got to be the opposite over the adjacent, okay? So if the opposite is 16, the adjacent is 14. Now the next step in this question is to write theta equals tan to the minus 1, 16 over 14. We know how to do that because we did it in the very first question. So on the calculator, you'll press Shift tan, and we've got 16. You can either use your fraction button or you can just use your division button. 16 divided by 14 is equal to, oh, I forgot to press Shift tan, that's better. 16 divided by 14 is 48, so theta equals 48.8 blah blah blah, but notice the question says to the nearest degree, so that's going to be 49 degrees to the nearest degree. All right, question number 4 asks us to find the size of the angle between the width and the diagonal. Just pause the video and see if you can start this question yourself. You should be able to draw yourself a rectangular television. So I'm going to draw a rectangular television, and I'm going to label the diagonal as 65 centimetres because that's what I've been told in the question here. And I'm also told that the height of the television is 30 centimetres, so I'm going to label this as 30 centimetres. Because it's a rectangle, we know that's a right angle there. And they're asking us to find the size of the angle between the width and the diagonal. So we're asked to find this angle in here. I'm going to call it theta. So now we've got a triangle that's a right angled triangle. This is 30. This is 65, and this is the angle we want to find. So let's label our sides. From that angle there, we've got a hypotenuse and an adjacent. So what kind of question is this going to be? Sine, cos, or tan? I'm really hoping that you decided that this was a cos question. So cos of the angle we want to find is equal to 30, the adjacent, over 65, the hypotenuse. You should be able to finish this question off because it's very similar to that one up there. Your next step will be theta equals cos to the minus 1, 30 over 65, and you can finish that one off yourself. The final question here says calculate the value of h to 2 decimal places. So again, we're going to decide whether it's a sine, cos, or tan question. So from the angle here, we've got the hypotenuse and we've got the opposite this time. So what will it be? Sine, cos, or tan? Well, the SOHCAHTOA tells us that when we've got O and H, it's going to be a sine question. So we write sine of 37 degrees is equal to, we have to be very, very careful here. We have to put the opposite over the hypotenuse. So it's going to be 10 over little h. When we have the letter on the bottom of the fraction like this, our next step becomes h equals 10 divided by sine of 37 degrees. Now I'm only putting that over there because I've run out of room to keep working down the page. If I put that into the calculator, so I now want 10 divided by sine 37. You should be doing this on your calculator. So pause, make sure you get the same answer as me. 16.62 to 2 decimal places. This question was in metres, so I'm going to answer in metres as well. So the length of the hypotenuse is 16.62 metres. Your homework tasks have lots of practice of all these types of questions, so don't just do the practice test, go and practice some other questions as well. Good luck.